Okay, no. So welcome to third discussion and lecture of the introduction to network security or network security fundamentals. Tonight we'll be talking about threats and attacks on endpoints. So hopefully by the end of this lecture, you will be able to identify the different type of attacks using malware. So basically, we're going to talk about different types of malware attacks, viruses, attacks on software, adversarial, artificial intelligence, a lot of goodies. So this specific lecture is going to be full of new jargons for those of you who have not been engaged in cybersecurity field in the past. For those of you who have been in this field, a lot of these are going to be very familiar. However, be ready for a lot of jargons to be thrown at you. You will be able to define application attacks. We're going to talk about different type of application attacks. You will be able to explain how threat actors use application attacks in order to exploit a system. And hopefully you will be able to define adversarial artificial intelligence attacks. So first thing first, let's start with the definition of a malware. And you hear this in many different places, many different books, and every book comes out with their own definition. It's really is not a big deal how you define it, as long as you understand it's a piece of software, it's a piece of code that does something that is not supposed to do. If you're the owner of the computer, you definitely don't want the malware to do what it does. So for that reason, we call it the malware in contrary with the software, right? So they enter your computer system without you knowing or without you wanting them to come in, and they perform unwanted and harmful actions. So most often they're used as a general term, and we kind of like call anything from a virus all the way to a worm to a toolkit, a rootkit to whatever we call them a malware. So that's basically a general definition. One thing that I want to clarify before we move any further is that none of these definitions that we have are like crystal clear cut, and none of them has sharp edges, right? There's always a kind of blurry edge, a kind of overlap between all these definitions. A lot of educational books try to kind of like cut those and say, okay, right, if it does this, it's a malware. It's not, otherwise it's not a malware. And so I want you to understand that these are kind of like loosely defined concepts, right? So malware is continually evolving to avoid detection by improved security measures. So the person who actually develops a malware either develops it in a way that it can evade and involve, or they just basically update their malwares. Like when you have a software and you receive the software updates every now and then, the malwares as well receive the updates to be able to go around the security measures of a system and fool your anti-malware applications like your antiviruses or your firewalls. So your book has an attempt on classifying these different type of malwares. They basically put them in 5 categories based on the actions that the malware performs. Like imprison, which we're going to talk about it, something like a ransomware, launch, snoop, deceive, and evade. So when it comes to imprison, you guys are kind of like familiar with the concept of ransomware, right? Basically, something takes over your computer, prevent you from doing what you actually want to do with the computer, and take your information as a ransom. And they ask for the ransom. Information is hostage, now you have to pay the ransom, right? And usually these days, everybody is asking for cryptocurrencies, right? So these are the common type of malware, right? And the goal is to take away your freedom of using your information, your freedom of having access to your information. Some of them, like crypto malwares, are even worse. They take over your computer and the ransom increases day by day, right? So depending on how the developer decides to run them. One thing to remember is the more complicated the malware becomes, the more complicated transferring that malware to your computer is going to be as well. Because a well-protected computer basically detects a lot of threats, a lot of malwares, right? And when you make your malware sophisticated, when you make your malware very complicated, that means you're enlarging it in the size. So instead of being a very small file, now you have a bigger file. And with that respect, you're going to be more prone to be detected by the anti-malwares. Some of the malwares and ransomwares in this case, they pretend to come from a law enforcement agency, while others come from maybe that princess in Nigeria who has lost a family and has millions of dollars in your country. But at the same time, they need you to send them money in order to basically get a ticket and come. To help them, you have to click here or you have to click there. Sometimes they come as fictitious warnings that they say, hey, your Adobe license is being expired, so click here and renew. Or basically they lure you into clicking somewhere or installing a small piece of code or anything from that realm. So imprisonments usually come with a ransom request right after that, and you can see a couple of screenshots of what has been captured from the older malwares and imprisonment malwares or ransomwares. Next one is crypto malware. A crypto malware is a type of malware that imprisons everything that you have on your device so that nothing can be accessed. And they put a cost on it with a timer next to it, which basically, if you don't purchase the key to unlock everything, as the time clicks, the cost increases. So basically, they push you to pay them faster, right? So they create that sense of urgency. Some of them even just send you direct emails. I was dealing with a case about a year ago that the crypto malware developer was literally sending email from a Gmail address to the company leaders, telling them, hey, starting today, your price is this much. And then the week after sent another one, hey, now your price is doubled. And kind of like pushed them to the extent that they came to the agreement that maybe we want to pay this guy and get our information back. It depends on how much that information actually worth for the owner of the information, right? So that's another screenshot example of the imprisonment. As you can see now, they're asking you to send Bitcoin to their wallet, and they have the wallet address here, which is, as you know, these wallets are untraceable most of the times, unless you're getting these wallets from very well reputable wallet providers, right? Coinbase or Coinbase Pro and all that, which they actually ask you for verification of identification. But most of the time, there is no way to trace them, right? So as you can see, hey, just send the Bitcoin here. And when you send the Bitcoin, they send you a key and they enable you to decrypt all of your information in return of the money you pay them. Next categorization of malware, according to the book that we are referring to, is the launch, right? So these are the malware that infect a computer to launch attacks on other computers, including viruses, worms, and bots, right? So basically, your computer turns into a slave to the master who owns the code of the malware and does what they want. So when it comes to the viruses, there are two types of viruses, right? We have a file-based viruses and file-less viruses. In the first case, the virus needs to attach itself to a code, to another file, right? Like a virus which is associated with another file, and it reproduces itself on the computer without even you need to intervene, without even clicking or anything from you. It just recreates itself, right? And these viruses can come in another variation that we just named them for the sake of discussion, for the sake of communication. We name them armored file-based viruses, which basically are more difficult to be detected. Like the code has been designed in a way that it does itself to hide itself from all of your anti-malware tools, and therefore they're more like difficult to be found, and we call them armored file-based. Again, just jargons, just the common language that you're supposed to learn, not that we can easily draw a line and say, if the malware does 1, 2, 3, exactly, now it's an armored file-based, right? So the techniques they use, some of them are like a split infection or mutation that we'll discuss further. These viruses first unload a payload, actually, to perform a malicious action. Then the virus replicates itself by inserting its code to another file, like the same as human viruses, right? They inject their RNA into our cells, and then they make the cell to reproduce, and therefore the virus is going to be reproduced as the cell is getting reproduced. So as you can see here, the virus code is attached to the program code. Altogether, we see this hypothetically as just one program that actually copies itself as it stays on our computer. So a fileless virus does not attach itself to a file, as the name actually clarifies, right? But instead takes advantage of a native service and processes that are a part of your operating system, like defragment or any type of processes that they belong to your operating system. And therefore, it is not going to be easily detected while it carries out any attack. So remember that these do not infect the file. Instead, the code is loaded directly into the computer's RAM. So your memory has the virus in there. Every time you boot it up, the memory is getting a copy of the virus, and the virus actually does what it's supposed to do based on the development. So usually the fileless viruses are more effective on attacks on the computers because they can easily infect. If their host doesn't exist in the computer, it's going to be almost impossible for those to be able to replicate themselves. You're going to have extensive control over those because you're not depending on a file, and you're not depending on what the file can provide for you as an infrastructure. Persistency is there, right? Of course, they're difficult to detect. They're open in the RAM. A lot of time, RAM is not that easy to be scanned for all type of viruses. And of course, those are difficult to defend against, right? So all in all, those are more dangerous, and those actually pose a bigger threat towards the system. So worms also are categorized under the launch type of attacks. So a worm itself is a malicious program that uses a computer network to replicate. So remember that we had the same thing happening on the same computer with the viruses, right? For that reason, sometimes we call this a network virus. So the only thing is to distinguish that both of the viruses and worms, they replicate themselves. However, viruses replicate themselves within just one computer, while a worm replicates themselves over the network. So they basically crawl from a computer to another one to another one. These are designed to enter a computer through the network and then take advantage of all the vulnerabilities, whether on the applications or on the kernel, on the OS. However, they can find the vulnerability on the host computer and then kind of like exploit it, and then move to another computer, or actually at the same time move to multiple computers within the network. So as you can see on the slide, today's worms can leave behind the payload on the systems they infect, and their payload actually can cause harm, like the viruses. So think about the worm as a carrier that goes from a computer to another computer, and it spreads the viruses on those computers. So actions that worms have performed include deletion of the files, changing the attributes on the files, right? Or actually allowing computers to be remotely controlled by an attacker, same as a Trojan or a bot. So a bot is another type of launch malwares that the infected computer, in case of a bot, turns into a zombie or a bot for the attacker. So attacker sends the code to the computer, infects the computer, and after that controls the computer. The next logical step is having multiple bots. The attacker, that now we can call him a bot herder, is going to own a botnet, a network of robots or bots that actually can be used for even more advanced type of attacks. One of the most commonly known attacks that bots actually implement is called denial of service attack, in which a lot of requests without acknowledges come to a port of an application service on a web server or on a remote server, and basically make it super busy so that it cannot respond back to the other requests that go towards it. We will talk about denial of service attack and dynamic denial of service attacks later in the future lectures of these series. So for now, I'm just going to put it to that extent so you know a botnet can be used by a bot herder, which is either the application owner, or by the way, the application owner, that the bot owner can go to the dark web and sell this bot. So someone who doesn't know anything can become a bot herder with just purchasing, let's say 100 computers, 200 computers, and use them for any kind of malicious intention. So usually these infected bot computers receive instructions through a command and control or CNC structure from the bot herder. So they have the CNC structure and they just send the commands out, and the bots actually are gonna follow that. One of the kind of like funny examples of the bots was, if you remember how PS5 was a scarce commodity when they launched it, and I think it's difficult to have your hand on a PS5. A lot of people were purchasing those through bots. So they had bots who were constantly hitting, let's say, Best Buy or Target's portals and trying to complete a purchase. So not necessarily bots are always used for bad intentions, but also you can use bots for good intentions like this kind of purchases as well. However, to begin with, using a bot is bad because that's not your computer. That's somebody else's computer that you have the control over if you have purchased the botnet, even if you have purchased it, right? Even if you use it for those kind of purchases, still the whole thing is going to be very questionable. Again, goes back to that definition we had about gray hat, black hat, and white hat, and walking the fine line of what is good and what is bad, right? Towards the end of this series, we're going to have a lecture over ethics, and we're going to have like a group discussion over what really is ethical to happen, what is not, and why. So let's skip these discussions for that. Next type of categories are snoopers or snoop attack. Two common are spywares and keyloggers. So spywares are tracking softwares which are deployed without the consent of the user. Actually, some advertisement agencies launch spywares on you as well to track your activity and see what are you interested in, so they can actually send you specific advertisements targeting your desires, right? Otherwise, they just sit on your computer, track what you do, and send the information out to the owner or to the malware developer. Then we do have the keyloggers, which silently capture any keystroke that you have, right? You just hit on any key, they capture it, and then send it to the malware developer or attacker.
Your mic keeps going in and out.
Excuse me? What was the question again? Okay. So
Professor,
yeah.
your audio is cutting out more and more.
How is it now?
It's okay, but
Okay.
yeah, your microphone
Like
is
the last minute of
intermittent.
talking just was unclear.
Okay, let me get closer to this and we continue over there. See if it dropped again, let me know, okay? So in case of a keylogger, right, the threat actor can search all the captured keystrokes and trying to mine your username and password out of those, or trying to mine your account number, address, phone number, anything that can be used for the next step of the attacks, right? So usually keylogging is the initial step of the attack over anything else. So as you can see, the snoopers or keyloggers can be either a software that get installed on your computer, or sometimes they can even be a hardware that gets installed between your keyboard and your computer. This version of keyloggers, the hardware keyloggers, are almost obsolete and like they disappeared from the earth. But in the past, they were very common. People were physically coming into your office, into your network, and then just connecting those between your computer and your keyboard, and basically just capture everything. Now the software versions are more common. So do you guys still see any problem with the audio, or we're good?
Good.
Okay, perfect. So next type of attack and malwares we want to discuss in this categories are the deceive category. So these are the malwares that attempt to deceive the user and hide their own true intentions, right? Some examples are the POPs, or potentially unwanted programs, Trojans, and remote access Trojans, or RATs. So remote access Trojans just come to your computer to open a backdoor for the attacker to later take advantage of it, right? The POPs are the softwares that you don't want on your computer, but they're there. They get themselves installed, like the pop-ups, right? The user advertisement pop-ups, Windows pop-ups, right? And like those they can be as harmless as an advertisement pop-up, or they can be as harmful as homepage hijackers, right? So that they can basically just take your session over and take advantage of it, or send the information to the attacker. Trojans, as you remember the Trojan horses story, right? Those are executable programs that masquerade as performing, and they basically are hiding themselves inside another program, right? Sometimes a Trojan comes to you as an application you download, right? You go to this website and you want a scientific calculator, and innocently download that scientific calculator, which looks to be a very good application. It actually works, but at the same time, underneath, it conducts the malicious intentions of the Trojan developer. The rats, they have the basic functionality of the Trojan as well. So they come in as this free video editor that you have. You go online and you find this free audio to MP3 converter, or a very common one is actually the torrent downloading applications. It's very common to have them as Trojans. You download this torrent downloading application, you are happy that you're downloading torrents, and at the same time, it opens up the remote access possibility so that an attacker can actually remotely gain access of your computer and have unrestricted access without any supervision, which means they can do whatever they want with your computer. It is really recommended to be careful about what you download from internet, right? Whether that's an application, whether that's, and sometimes you're looking for the applications which are actually very legit, like you want to download a Ubuntu ISO, or some kind of freeware that you download and you want to use it. But basically you're not downloading anything but a Trojan, which there are methods on how to avoid getting into these traps, which we're going to talk about it later in the future lectures. Next one is evade, right? So this category of malware attempts to help malware or attacks evade detection, right? So something like a backdoor or a logic bomb or a rootkit, these are doing the best to hide themselves, right? Backdoor gives access to a computer, so basically open up the backdoor so that attackers can come in, right? Sometimes the backdoor only opens a port that a specific service needs to gain access to your computer or do something like maybe just an FTP transfer from or to your computer. Then we do have the logic bombs, which are the computer codes that append themselves to a good code, and stay there till a specific trigger starts them working, right? So I don't know if you guys ever heard about the Chernobyl virus, which started working same time as the anniversary of the Chernobyl nuclear plant in Russia. So they come in, they don't do anything, they hide themselves for a while. You don't even know the logic bomb is in your computer. You feel everything is good. You don't even get suspicious about the possibility of a logic bomb laying down underneath the files of your computer. But at a specific time or at specific trigger, maybe with just an email that comes to your computer, they can be triggered. Maybe with you downloading another application, they can be triggered. That's all about how they're designed. But the reason they call logic bombs is because they come in, don't do anything, wait for the trigger, and they act. So rootkit is a malware that can hide its presence and the presence of other malwares on the computer. So they do it by accessing the lower layers of the OS. And the problem with the rootkits is, and usually these are the most difficult ones to be removed off of your computer, is that they go and they sit as close as possible to the kernel of the computer. So when they are close to the kernel of actually your operating system, any application that is sitting on your operating system is going to have a lot of difficulty to cut them off, because it's like you're sitting at the tip of a branch and you want to cut the trunk, right? The problem is you possibly don't have any access to the trunk, or you don't have the permission to touch the trunk, right? That's basically the problem of rootkits. The closest possible to the kernel is where they sit. Now let's do a knowledge check activity. So what is the primary action that crypto malware performs?
Imprisonment.
Any other
Prison.
ideas? Anyone has any answer about A?
No, just A.
Okay, cool. So the survey says A, right? So of course, this type of malware imprisons users. And do you remember what was the characteristic of the crypto malware? The ransom is increasing by time, right? As you don't pay it, the ransom gets increased. Again, definition, like you may see a crypto malware that does not increase the ransom. You cannot say why, right? Remember, all of these definitions have blurry edges. So now for the rest, we want to talk about the application attacks, right? So a famous category of attacks is looking for vulnerabilities in applications or manipulate applications to compromise them. So common targets of attackers using application attacks are internet web servers. The internet web server, very famous one for Microsoft, is called IIS. That has been the target of many application attacks so far. We do have Apache, we do have different type of web servers out there. And usually application attacks are against those because they have a public facing interface that can be compromised by those who have just an access to internet and the knowledge on how to compromise these, right? Just going online to the internet, find that web application server, and then start deploying attacks against it. So usually a web server provides services that are implemented as web applications. So you may hear the term web app loosely used for both web applications and web services, right? What happens is you have a server, underlying layer has a code running, and then the interface is basically nothing but a web application that you can have access to and call the methods and the commands and get it to do something that you're desiring to happen. First type of attack against application goes to be scripting, right? So the famous one is XSS or cross-site scripting attack, right? So basically a website accepts user input without validating it and uses that input as a response, then that website can be exploited. So basically, we do have many reports, many vulnerability scans that show a website is prone to cross-site scripting. These are the websites that user inputs are not being validated. So with that vulnerability being there, you can trick the website to think that the malicious script that you have is good and then send it to another user's web browser, right? So you write a script, feed it to the website, and the website now feeds it to the user's web browser, and therefore you have access to their web browser through the malicious code that you just put in. Another type of attack, again, is injection. And that's part to understand the examples that are to come, and we need a little bit of knowledge of structured query language or SQL. But most of the injection attacks are happening on the online forms that you fill out, which they don't have the data input validation in place. They don't have good input validation processes. These ones are very prone to SQL injections. Other codes can be injected as well, right? But the most common one is SQL. SQL injection attacks are targeting the servers by just sending a command instead of the data that's supposed to go to a form field, right? And this basically fools and gets executed on the back end. For example, one of the commands that we do have in SQL language is deleting a table, right? You can just simply put delete, a space, and the name of the table, right? This by itself just deletes the whole table. If the input validation is not there, an attacker can enter this instead of the field that he's supposed to put the first name inside. The other type of attack is request forgery, right? It's basically a request that has been fabricated. It's not a real request. And there are two types of it. We do have cross-site request forgery, or CSFR, and server-side request forgery, or SSRF. And the cross-site request forgery in CSRF, basically the attacker takes advantage of an authentication token that a website sends to a user's web browser. So let's talk a little bit about this. Think about the fact that you just logged into your Canvas account, right? A handshake has happened between your computer and Canvas, and a session has been established between you and Canvas, which is an authenticated session. So if I can trick the website to load another web page instead of the actual web page, right? Within the account, within the session that you already have, instead of you going to the grade, I make the website with the same session to go to the grade page that you have on your Canvas. And now the website thinks, hey, I'm the same person as you are, right? Because every page that you open is going to inherit the permissions and the privileges and identity that you have actually authenticated with the original website. especially this can be abused in the case of the websites who have a lot of hierarchy pages. So you can basically go to the child pages with the same session and fool the website to think the original user is still over there. Let's go over here. So first step is the attacker forged a fund transfer request from bank A and embedded it into an email hyperlink, right? So you receive an email which says, I'm Princess so-and-so from Nigeria. Can you help me to get a ticket and come to US where I have billions of dollars in Bank of America so I can actually share it with you. But it's nothing but a bank fund transfer request. Then I'm going to send it to you. You look at it and you're like, oh my God, this may be a good money-making opportunity. So you click on it. You don't know what is that link, right? But before you click on it, you have been logged into your bank. So you have an active session with your bank, right? Now, when you click on it, the request is being sent to the bank, but because you already have an active session, without you even knowing, the bank assumes that this request is as well coming from you and therefore authenticated, and the fund transfer happens. So again, I'm kind of like forging this request. So you, without knowing it, are clicking on it, and I'm taking advantage of the established session that you already have at that bank. A couple of steps are involved for sure, and a part of this attack is the familiar phishing that we discussed previously. So the server-side request forgery is a bit different, right? And SSRF takes advantage of trusting relationship between web servers. So two web servers that actually have a trust established. So they don't do authentication, they consider each other safe. And this is so against the zero trust policy, which later when we are talking about hardening the security, we say that we love to have zero trust in place. So nothing is really trusted, everything is being checked. In this case, the trust relationship has been established between web servers. So the attack exploits how a web server processes external information received from another server, right? So as you can see on the slide, some web applications are designed to read information from or write information to a specific URL, specifically the APIs or application programming interfaces act like this. So if an attacker can modify that target URL, they can potentially extract sensitive information from the application or inject untrusted input into it. A lot of time, the API commands that are being sent out to a specific URL, they have information that can be abused and can be used in, for an exploit into the whole system. These are, as you can notice, a little bit more advanced attacks. They need more knowledge to be implemented. And the other ones that they discuss, like viruses, worms, development of a virus needs a lot of knowledge, but you can easily gain access to a worm, then customize it and take advantage of it and conduct an attack on some servers without even knowing what you did, without even knowing how the whole thing actually has happened, right? So more complicated attacks here than those ones for beginners or let's say for script kiddies. So again, over here you have a comparison between CSRF and SSRF. As you can see, the attack target of the cross-site scripting is user, while the server side is the web server. And the purpose on the first one is to force the target to take action for attacker while pretending to be the authorized user, right? Sending the link to you, so you send it to the target, so target fools and things like you sent it, not the attacker. While on SSRF, the goal is to gain access to sensitive data or inject harmful data through the URL links that you send between the servers. Replay attack. These are the attacks which are commonly used against digital identities, right? I can spoof or get your digital identity, the information you sent to a specific website. I can obtain it through your cookies or anything, and then later send those to the same website to impersonate your identity, right? So what I need is to intercept the data you're sending, copy that. So basically a man-in-the-middle attack, copy that, and then I can edit them accordingly to match at my intentions, and then communicate it to the same web application in order to impersonate you, basically replaying those for the application. Many digital identity replay attacks are between a user and an authentication server. So usually be careful where you are logging into your authorized accounts. Like if you're sitting in a Starbucks and you are trying to log into your bank account, be sure that you're connecting to the actual access point that Starbucks is providing. One of the very most commonly known attacks, man-in-the-middle attack, is very doable with public internets, right? So there are devices like Pineapple Wi-Fi that basically are automated man-in-the-middle devices. You need to have a Kali Linux installed on your laptop, have access to a Pineapple Wi-Fi, have an antenna, go sit in a Starbucks, just figure out the wireless. And then what you can do right after that is you can turn your Pineapple Wi-Fi into a free Wi-Fi access point. Now, everybody who comes, because there is no authentication, a lot of devices are set to automatically get connected to internet when it's accessible. Now you're offering free Wi-Fi, right? You know, on your cell phones, for example, you have this setting that you can say, do not connect the free and open networks. If you have not set that, your phone automatically gets connected. On the other side, you are providing internet. That means the phone of the victim now goes to internet through your Pineapple Wi-Fi and your Kali Linux laptop, which now is listening to the traffic. So when they try to log in, the information they sent in can be stored in your system. And as simple as that, you can actually get access to the information they have. Of course, it's way more difficult when the server is using encrypted protocols like HTTPS, which is HTTP with SSL on top of it, secure socket layer protocol. And that can be a little bit more complicated for those, but still there are many sites that you can spoof information about and conduct a successful man-in-the-middle attack. And then after that, you can either do a replay or just use that information for any other intention. By you guys, I'm meaning the malicious actor, not you as my students. I'm pretty sure you guys never do this, never. I trust you all. So now let's talk about the attacks on the software. Those attacks basically just look into the vulnerabilities of the software applications. Each application which is being developed, no matter how well they develop it, every now and then vulnerabilities are in there which are not either noticed at all, or if those were noticed, they were not patched or they were not addressed. So the result of which is now you have a vulnerable software system that an attacker who is familiar with these vulnerabilities can just come out and take advantage of those, right? The attacks include exploiting memory vulnerabilities. A lot of time, good memory management does not happen. And therefore, attacks like Stack Overflow or code interchange can happen on a software that doesn't do a good memory management. Remember, when the information is open in the memory, in the RAM, they're not encrypted. They're unencrypted. So they're in plain text. Those are very, very accessible, right? So if you don't manage the memory, if you don't define proper exception handlings, which means when the software faces an error, how the software is going to react. If you don't do those good things in development of the software, you're going to end up with a vulnerable software, which then can be the target of these kind of attacks. I don't know if you guys remember or not, but old days when we were using Windows 98, or even before that, 95, one thing that was super common was the blue page of death, where the Windows was crashing because an application was not working properly, or the OS itself was not working properly, and memory issues were happening, leading to a crash, which those blue pages were shown, explanation of the crash, and then restarting the computer. In a similar fashion, memory can be exploited. Exception handling, error handling is not good. That can be exploited. Or even some external software components like the plugins can be exploited. So when we talk about software attacks, we have to mention memory vulnerabilities. Otherwise, we have neglected the huge vulnerability that usually is out there. So some memory-related attacks are called resource exhaustion. And the reason for that is because they deplete the part of memory that the software wants to use, right? And then interface with the normal operation of the program that the software has is now actually non-existent. So the program cannot work properly because the memory is now depleted from all the information that the software already have copied into the RAM in order to work properly, right? Some other memory related attacks attempt to manipulate memory context, such as buffer overflow or stack overflow attacks or integer overflow attacks. Basically, we don't want to go way beyond the scope of this lecture, but when we do calculations, when we do addressing in the memory, when the memory starts being full, let's consider, in order to do some kind of process or calculation, you need to have different variables and their values stored in the memory, right? And each time you get a new value, you just add it on top of a stack, like you have a stack of books that you add book over book over book as you are conducting a research, right? So let's put this example down. You're conducting a research, you have a desktop which has limited space, and then you have a stack of books that every time that you get some information out of it, you read it, put it in your research paper, and then put it on top of the stack. So as you move up, there is a point that you don't have no more room to put any book on top of it. And that's the point that if you put a book on top of it, it's going to fall down to where you don't know where. That's the stack overflow, right? And when the stack overflow happens, the entire memory and software become vulnerable and now can be exploited. Those of you who are interested in this topic, you can just pursue software development, especially if you learn programming languages like C++, which they do have concept of pointers and they do have direct memory management. You're going to learn way more about these. A lot of attackers in this field, they are familiar with the programming languages that they have a strong direct memory management tools and libraries available in those, such as C or C++. So we do have buffer overflow attacks. Those occur when a process attempts to store data in RAM beyond the boundaries of a fixed length storage buffer. And this extra overflow data just trickles into the adjacent memory locations. And if those adjacent memory locations are used by another application, now the values that the other application was using are the values which trickle down from the adjacent application not the actual values that they were intended to use, right? So let's say in those memory spaces, they had values 5 and 6. Now value 3 overflows and just drops there, overwrites the value, and when the application comes to add 5 and 6 or whatever values it wanted to add up, it's dealing with the values which actually do not belong there. We also have integer overflow attack, which changes the value of variable to something outside the range that the programming had intended by using an integer overflow. So that's again change of the variables, change of the value of the variable to something which is not supposed to be there. There are good number of times that this can lead into your operating system freeze and not working anymore, and now you need to kind of like restart it. Sometimes attackers can take advantage of these vulnerabilities in order to inject the code into a specific program to make the program do what they want it to do. The other common issue, vulnerability, is improper exception handling, right? When you think of exception, think of program arriving at a point that doesn't know what to do, doesn't know what should happen. For example, you have developed a small code that's supposed to receive 2 inputs from the user and then add them up and show the result, right? So basically it's like input A, input B, C equals A plus B, now output C, as simple as that. Now when the input A starts and the user who's supposed to type a number, 6, 7, 10, whatever, now types in Ali, which is a character, or types in question mark slash. Now the program is like, oh my God, what should I do with this? This is going to lead to an error, right? When it leads to an error, your programmer should do something called exception handling. And these kind of cases, when the error occurs, the compiler throws an exception, which is a message that tells the program that, hey, an error happened that I don't know what to do with it, and possibly some information with the exception type. As the programmer, you basically put these into blocks that catch the error and react to the error. So instead of just putting down input A, input B, C equals A plus B, output C, we put the entire block into a catch block, which means, okay, if an exception happens, I want to catch it, I want to see it. And then you put a conditional statement saying, if the exception was wrong error, then output, sorry, I cannot finish the task, please enter some integers. So this way, your program is not going to go broke, is not going to crash, your system is not going to freeze, and software vulnerabilities cannot be exploited because you handled the exception. So basically, you told the software, in case of an error, what should you do? That's exception handling in a nutshell. Again, if you're interested in learning more, you have to go for learning more programming languages. On the same place that you're watching this video now, you actually can find other videos talking about exception handling in C++ and Java. If you're interested, like, take a look at those. It's about 10-15 minutes videos, and it's really useful if you're interested in learning about software exploits. So sometimes you have errors about null pointers. Pointers are basically variables that point to a specific address in memory, not to a variable, to an address in memory, right? So variables can be any place in the memory, and they are just a reference, right? But the pointer tells you, hey, what is actually in that specific point of the memory? A null pointer is a pointer that does not point to any place, right? So when you want to make sure a pointer is not existent, you just set it to null. And this thing is now not pointing anywhere, right? So when an application dereferences a pointer which has the value of null, of course, this doesn't point anywhere, right? Dereferencing is the process of reading the information that a pointer is pointing to. So if a pointer is pointing to memory space at address 001F, and the value that is stored there is 5, when you dereference this pointer, you actually are going to get number 5 returned back to you as the value that this pointer is pointing to. Now think about this pointer be set to null. If you dereference it, you're going to infinity because there is nothing that this pointer is pointing to, right? These are going to call a computer program crash. Your program goes nuts. Hey, this is not pointing to nothing. There is nothing. Now your program is going to go looking for nothing, which is going to cause exits or any kind of more problematic issues. And remember, most of these attacks on software applications, in order to break them from normal procedure, is just the first step of an attack. Okay, I break this application, computer crashes, they need to restart the server. When are the servers most vulnerable? When they are restarting, when everything is not loaded yet, right? Or if this server has your entire antivirus on, if the server has your SIEM, right, or SOAR, which we discussed last week, then what happens is now you don't have an event monitoring system in place because it's restarting. We will talk about how to defend against these. We'll talk about redundancies we can have in place, basically having multiple servers running our SIEM. So in such case, just one computer goes down, the rest are there, but we're going to talk about those later. We also have attacks on external software components. So in addition to attack the software itself directly, the components that software use to conduct its purpose actually can be attacked. Some of those are the device drivers, right? A device driver is something that tells the hardware how to work. Let's say if you have a software that plays music, plays MP3, right? Or plays WAV or whatever format. If it is playing music, then the music is going to be sent to your audio card, which then your audio card is going to translate from the digital code into the analog audio that you hear on a speaker. If this device driver be attacked on, even though the MP3 player that you have is not attacked on itself, still it cannot work because it's working with that device driver to tell the hardware what to do. A lot of time, in order for something to happen in the computer, software works with drivers to tell hardware what to do. Even when you play a game, the graphics card needs to receive the commands from the device driver or graphic cards driver in order to kind of like show what you see on the screen. The other part is the libraries, right? Each application uses multiple libraries in order to work. And these libraries are like DLLs, or dynamic libraries that help the application to fulfill their jobs. These are basically the files that your application goes to read information from. And if the DLLs are corrupted or attacked on, then your application is not going to work. Sometimes you have worms or viruses that their only role is to affect the DLLs. You still can open your Zoom, for example, right? But because the DLL, which is related to video conferencing, is now broken, you cannot open your camera, or you cannot gain access to, let's say, your microphone or anything, right? Or sometimes lack of DLLs is going to break the software and prevent it from loading to begin with. Next are the APIs, the application programming interfaces. So APIs are basically like, if you want to think of an API, think of your car. When you get into your car has some underlying technology like the engine, brakes, transmission, everything that you don't see. But what you deal with is the steering wheel, gear shifting knob, possibly 2 or 3 paddles, gas, brake, or if you have a clutch, right? And that's pretty much mostly what you have. This interface, this common interface gives ability to work with the car. You may not drive your car the same way that I made to drive it, right? Some of you guys may be like fast drivers, drift drivers. I mean, some of us like me could be like slow drivers, right? Some of us may have never used the blinkers. Some of us may use it all the time. You know, it doesn't matter. We use this car in different ways. Every single one of us use the same car in different ways through the API of the car, which is what I just talked about, the interface that has the steering wheel, paddles, and shifting gear, right? So APIs basically provide methods to call, function to calls, and you can call them and then they call sub functions or sub methods of a system to fulfill a task that you're asking it. Like when you want to accelerate, you know you have to call the method gas pedal. Okay, I'm going to call gas pedal and the car is going to go fast. Underneath, pushing that pedal is going to increase the amount of gas that enters the cylinders. It's going to increase the amount of air intake. It's going to change, maybe kick the turbo in, or many things are going to happen underneath, but we just use that. So if you attack an API, as you can guess, if you can damage the API, now you have damaged the whole thing. If I can change your pedals in a way that when you push the gas pedal, car goes to the right, now it's impossible to work with this because the API is not working the way it's supposed to. Or I can just inject a code into API to take a copy of everything that you do and send it to me. That's a type of man-in-the-middle attack again. There are many ways that you can compromise these, right? So let's do a knowledge check here. Let's see who answers this for me. Which type of application attacks might use the following syntax? This, I have to sell it to you. This is a SQL command, basically. Any ideas?
See?
SQL injection? Anybody has a different answer? Let's see, guys. I have like 12 or 21 of you present. Someone tells me something. Oh, I see in the chat. Okay. I see 2 C's. Anybody has any ideas besides C? So the survey says, yes, it's SQL injection. I already sold it to you. I said, this is a SQL command, right? So basically, this is telling show anything that has no email, no value for the email, and then the list is going to be populated. So any type of SQL command that is entered in any kind of form field is going to create a SQL injection attack. Okay, is there any questions so far, guys?
No. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear
Oh,
you.
okay. Oh, but back to that question. It's on page 79, table 3-5 for more info.
Page 79, which one?
Page 79 on the book.
Uh-huh.
It's table 3-5. It has SQL injection statements.
Ah, okay, okay. Yeah, but since I'm not sure everybody has studied the book beforehand, I'm telling you guys this is a SQL command. Anyway, thanks for mentioning it. Next thing is adversarial artificial intelligence attacks, right? But beforehand, let's see what is artificial intelligence. Can anybody tell me what is artificial intelligence?
Basically, any program that can learn from experience the way humans do.
Almost, yeah. Any program that can think like a human, right? Anything that can learn and get more intelligent as it moves. A subset of artificial intelligence is machine learning that I believe you have heard it a lot from Apple advertisements. By use of machine learning, now we are doing something that Androids have been doing for the last 10 years, right? So anyway, in cybersecurity these days, we are using artificial intelligence to enhance the detection of any kind of malware or a threat. The thing is, the vulnerabilities and risks are associated with these tools as well. Because it's like the police, right? If you have a police that controls the society, the community to be safe, one vulnerability that you introduce is if the police is corrupt itself, right? So if these artificial intelligence tools are going to be compromised themselves, they're going to introduce way bigger risk to your system, right? So to understand them, we need to understand and know what these tools are, the artificial intelligence and machine learning tools, and what they can actually do, right? How they are used in cyber, and what are the risks associated with those. So remember, we said these are not like a one-way ticket solution to everything. There are many different definitions of AI, right? But basically, you can say it's a technology that imitates human abilities. And one of the biggest human abilities is what? Learning. We learn. We learn through the patterns, right? Everyone learns through the patterns. And now we make the machines to learn through the patterns. Let me give you an example. Let's have it like a quick discussion. If I'm walking in the streets on southern side of the sideway, right? And then on the other side, northern side, somebody is walking and they're getting close to a car. Before they even touch the car, I can guess if they own the car or not, right? Can you tell me, how do you guess if somebody is owner of a car that is approaching it or not?
Body language.
What was that?
Reaching for their
Somebody said reaching
reaching for their keys.
exactly, reaching to their pockets, changing the angle of walk towards the driver door, right? Trying to reach to the other side, looking more focused on the car, right? These are the patterns that all of us agree show this person may be, with a very high probability, the owner of the car, right? So if you put a computer system and with a gigantic database with a good memory, right? And you feed it training patterns, the computer is going to learn, it's going to compare the new events that it observes with the patterns, that the training patterns that you introduce. And through that, making intelligent decisions. That's basically what the machine learning is. So instead of you teaching the machine is learning from the patterns. Think about Tesla cars. They have a computer on board, they're driving on the road, and continuously they are recording. They're recording the events that happens on the road and the consequences of those events as well. So when you have this huge amount of data being recorded from every car, and you know they all communicate to the server, now these cars can learn how to drive in this specific area. Like if that is Golden Gate Bridge on a Sunday, they know on a Sunday, usually Golden Gate Bridge is very busy. So they want to reduce the speed. They want to drive it slower. Does it make sense, guys? You just see the patterns. You just see what is being repeated. That means the machines don't need you to teach them anything, but they learn by themselves. They just capture the patterns, compare the patterns, find the repetitions, which pattern repeats itself the most, and how they relate to a single consequence or single result. Now, they put that result on top, and every time they find a new pattern that leads to the same results, they're going to add it over there. So the more these cars are driving on the street, the more intelligent they're going to become. So the self-driving option of your Tesla gets better by day. Gets better every time someone gets into a shady situation. A dangerous situation happens to a Tesla driver, every Tesla car learns out of it. And that doesn't need no human being to intervene. Right? So it's about repetition, experience, and the patterns. In cybersecurity, AI or machine learning allows us to detect, predict, and kind of like forecast if some behavior is malicious, is dangerous, is risky, or anything in that realm, right? So some examples are all the email systems that you have. Virtually almost all of the email systems, from interfaces on web like Apple, Google, Yahoo, or the applications you install like Outlook, Apple Mail, or anything, these virtually follow the pattern of the emails to figure out what is a spam, what is a phishing attack, right? Some of them have the option for you to mark an email as a spam. So basically you're helping them, but letting them know, okay, these type of emails are spams. And then they learn and move them to the folder that you have under like junk folder or spam folder or whatever you have. One of the things that they learn is which one of emails you delete without even opening. If you do that, they see the pattern. Okay, if an email comes from, let's say, I don't know, that sender who advertises, I don't even want to use any name on the recording, but anyway, from company X, and you always delete that, you don't even open it. After a while, you're going to notice that automatically gets moved to your spam folder. And that's how the machine learning works, right? So best advantage of the AI is that every time an attack happens, your defense system becomes stronger. Same thing that we say, something that doesn't kill you just makes you stronger. And that's what happens in the AI, in the machine learning. Okay. Just look at the last bullet point here. About 1 in 5 organizations use cybersecurity AI before 2019, increasing to 2 out of 3 organizations planning to deploy it before the end of 2022. And at 2022, which we are, the last report was showing 1 out of 1 companies uses AI for cyber detection. So with that comes a risk. With that comes the possibility of adversarial artificial intelligence, right? Okay, now that they have a pattern, now that they have an algorithm to analyze these patterns and learn from those, what if I change this algorithm so that they cannot detect a specific type of threat? Going back to our example of Tesla, what if I change the algorithm that every time the car, the dangerous driver is driving the forward focus, the data is redirected to, hey, this is not dangerous. Now forward focuses will become the Achilles heels of Teslas. Does it make sense, guys? So the danger is, hey, they can be manipulated. Another risk is tainted training data for machine learning. What if I feed them bad data? What if I tamper with the data? And now that training data is going to turn the machine into detecting a normal application of threats and a threat to a normal application. So it's important to have a trustable source that provides the machine learning and a trustable maintenance system that keeps it intact. Another knowledge review. Which of the following is a concern of using AI and machine learning in cybersecurity?
Is it D?
Anybody else has an answer?
C, the data poisoning.
D.
Delta D.
I see a lot of these in the chat as well. So the survey says D, and we just talked about it, right? Cool, guys. So I know that tonight we actually went over tons of information and jargons, right? Remember, this is introduction to cybersecurity. So usually at one point we have to start throwing out the jargons and talk about them. And for you guys, this one was full of jargon, right? So we talked about endpoints, we talked about malwares, we talked about different type of malwares tonight, right? We talked about different categories that we went through in this book, like snoops, evade, imprison, all of those goodies. And then we talked about the cross-site forgery, requests forgery. We talked about cross-site scripting. We talked about AI. We talked about benefits and the drawbacks of the AI. So with that, this lecture is over. I'm going to stop the recording now.